Next poll we're going to put up now, and just saying, what do you believe is the main driver to deploy in operations, which becomes really important. Mark, thanks for joining us. So before I introduce you properly, Mark, what do you think is going to be, I'm going to ask you to do a bit of crystal ball gazing. What do you think is the main driver you will see to deploy operations?
It's a difficult one, and I think we might see a bit of a spread between probably enhance the customer experience, reduce OPEX, and the simplify and accelerate operations, because these are the challenges that the service providers are really trying to drive towards. But I do think the reduce OPEX is a common one that I hear from service providers.
Well, let's see the results, Mark, and let's see if you're right. Let's pull them up. So the number one is to simplify and accelerate operations, then looking at reducing OPEX and customer experience. So well done, Mark. Not too far off there. I think, this is, I think they're all very much related, but, important. Well, I should introduce you properly now, Mark. So delighted that our next keynote speaker is Mark Hiseman, who's the Adaptive Service Assurance Project Management Director for EXFO, who's going to be talking to us about now AI-driven adaptive service assurance in action. Mark, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Aaron. So today I would like to talk about AI-driven adaptive service assurance in action. As we've heard from the presenters already, 5G is going to bring some significant changes to everything that we do in the telecoms industry. Significant growth in traffic, significant growth in the number of orchestrated networks and services. And this is quite important because ultimately this is the area where things will be managed on an automated basis from a network perspective. Things will be much more dynamic and constantly changing. And then add to that the increase in the amount of machines and IoT devices out there. And essentially that means that we're no longer just managing simple networks, we're managing high volume, high velocity networks that are constantly changing. And so really that brings with it lots of new challenges, because you have to be able to keep up, and there are limits to what humans can keep up with. Yes, you could keep throwing resources at the problem, but that instantly becomes a big challenge. A lot of these services in the 5G world will be delivered with those new network slicing capabilities, and that's like having networks within networks. And again, that's going to add more complexity. And also, a lot of those revenue streams are going to depend on these SLAs. Now, SLAs have always been there, especially with a lot of enterprise customers, but they will become more important and more in depth as well. And so what we see is essentially a new level of requirements, new level of expectations as well. There needs to be this real-time visibility per user, per device, per service, per network, but also end-to-end as well. You need to think about the data itself. Traditionally, as assurance service provider, as EXFO is, we've always focused very much on our own data, gathering data for ourselves and displaying that in our own applications. But actually, that's not the way things will be in the future. In fact, you need to be data agnostic. You need to be able to think about the data and the cost of the data as well. And as I said before, the orchestration level within these environments will mean that things will come and go as new slices are spun up or new network functions are introduced to the network. And really that's going to mean that you need to have actionable data, because without the actionable data, it's much more difficult to automate those tasks and those activities. And there's some big challenges as well. We need high quality data in real time, but it's expensive and it's slow, but it's essential for high quality networks and 5G. And that's essentially what drives detection, analytics, automation, and these new revenue streams. And the biggest challenge with all of that is that historically, we've been able to capture all of the data in an environment, and it has been big, and it does drive lots of actions and lots of very clever modeling, but you won't be able to keep doing it in the way that you've always done it. because service assurance will be orchestrated in those automated networks, and there will be a very, very tight coupling between the orchestration and the orchestrators themselves at the different levels of those networks and the assurance capabilities as well. And you need to be able to capture this data, handle this data, subscribe to data, and use that information in a more automated and AI-driven way. Because ultimately, if you don't do that, you won't be able to keep up with the demands of the 5G world. And essentially, you're going to get service blueprints, intents, and workflows that drive the assurance systems to kick into play. When you spin up a new slice, you might want to trigger an active test to verify that that slice is functioning as you would expect before you allow real customers onto that slice. And the assurance system needs to talk to the orchestrator as well. When it sees problems, when it identifies anomalies, when it makes recommendations to changes in that particular environment. And the orchestrator will make those feedback loops as well back to the assurance system. And so there's very, very tight integration between these two worlds. We frequently get asked about probes. Naturally, we are a probe vendor. We have passive monitoring capability. And people say, do I need a probe? Do I need a new probe? Because you're in the cloud. Do I need a cloud native probe? Well, actually, the answer to the question is you need both, because there is that capability of taking data straight from the elements, extracting the insight from existing systems, and it's source agnostic, because it could come from lots of different places. But data's your friend. Data helps you drive those automations and also helps with those AI-driven activities as well. But you need the new probe because you need to be able to spawn, instantiate these capabilities and scale as needed. Your service assurance needs to be adaptive because you're getting the information you need at a very high level from those existing systems, from the actual network itself. But when there are problems, you may need to have more detailed insight, which means you may need to instantiate some probes, or you may want to trigger some other kind of activity. In the new world, service assurance will have to be adaptive because it's part of those automations. It's part of that closed loop control. You require fast monitoring and analytics, but you also need to be able to control the data, because you could collect all of the data all of the time, process it all of the time, and store it all of the time to the nth degree. But you don't actually need it all of the time. You only ever need the data when you're trying to troubleshoot a particular problem, or you're using certain pieces of data to drive other activities across the service provider ecosystem. And so what we're recommending is that you collect, you process, and you store just the right amount of data, filter it and enrich it to create the metrics that you need, and store trace level information at the level you need if you had to troubleshoot it, and do all of that locally. And then only transmit the information that you actually need. A good example of this is that in a CDR, there's many, many fields to a CDR, but you only need a handful of those to create a metric. And so why would you transport all of that data across your network using very valuable bandwidth just to assure the systems and services that you're providing? And there's also the question about CPU and network and resources, both in the edge and the cloud. These environments are great, they're elastic, but they're also set up in a very different way. So you need to think much more carefully about how you capture, process, store, and move the data. And what you want to do is move that data for the smallest possible record size and volume to do what you need to do, and therefore deliver that assurance of those services and that customer experience. When we look at the complexity, we're seeing significant complexity. We're struggling as service providers in the current world to keep up with the 4G environments. That's only going to get 100 times worse with the 5G environments. as we see slices, virtualization, orchestration, and the IoT explosions, as many more industries automate their own environments. And that creates blind spots. And yeah, we could collect all that data and put it into big data worlds, but that will create latency. And so you need to capture the right data at the right time and use things like machine learning to understand what is normal, so that you can then do that analytics and that diagnosis. Again, leverage the AI, leverage the machine intelligence to help you with those processes, so that you can make smart decisions and take effective action and learn. That's the whole point of using a much more AI-driven environment, is that you learn when you do resolve problems and you do fix issues, that you learn what went well and what doesn't work, so that you know you're in a better position the next time it happens. And this will help transform everything from the way services are delivered and those slices are instantiated to the way that you operate and the customer experience that you can deliver. But it's not about operating in silos, as you heard there from AJ. This is about being integrated, being very, very joined up with the ecosystem that you're dealing with. And it's a journey. We saw from Aaron's presentation that it is a journey. It talks about different levels of automation and how different service providers are at different stages of that journey and can't necessarily see the path to the next stage. But AI is also a journey, and there's no magic bullet to achieve zero-touch autonomous networks, and each communication service provider will travel a unique journey as long as it takes them in order to reach their goals. We have a very quick example here of sharing the way things used to be done. We used to spend a lot of time calculating KPIs and generating alerts, etc., in a very manual way, and then interpreting them, investigating them, diagnosing root causes, etc., etc. But we actually built a platform that automated this entire process so that you spend minutes identifying the problem. And we have a very excellent example where we were actually invited to a particular war room activity with many experts from many different vendors. And they were trying to use their old techniques to diagnose a problem through manual correlation, not necessarily knowing all of the data they were dealing with. And obviously being in a war room with a lot of C-level executives is a bit stressful, and there was a lot of panic. As we joined this call, we brought up our Sense AI platform, and we showed them what we could see. We showed them what that meant in terms of a platform that was setting those thresholds automatically, triggering KPI alarms across multiple sets of data, correlating those cases together, identifying that root cause automatically. And we were able to inform these vendors and this particular service provider that actually this is the problem and this is the root cause and this is what you need to go and fix. And they had spent many, many hours trying to figure this out for themselves. And it only took a machine using some very clever AI a matter of minutes to get to the same point. We have a quick example. This example is essentially a live running of our solution in a particular operator. The issue was high latency for accessing Facebook and some other services that were Facebook related. It affected nearly 1 million subscribers. And what you can see from the screen here is it's not just one case that triggers. There's several cases that trigger all at the same time, and they are actually related. And so not only can you see where the problem manifests itself, but you can also see through the AI where else that is impacting and also what the root cause is. In this particular case, tied probably to one specific Facebook server. So it's not even a problem of the operator themselves. But having that insight and all of that crunching of numbers and detail done much more quickly ultimately allowed this operator to get to that root cause significantly quickly. But we're on a journey with our customers to deliver that AI-driven service assurance and automation. But it is a journey, and we are working with many customers on that journey. And it's not something that every operator is going to suddenly overnight deliver this automation and this improved AI-driven world. But it is something that operators have to do in order to keep up with the advances of the dynamic and very, very complicated 5G world that we are now embarking upon.